This is my house, you are just staying here. Those words from my son Ethan cut sharper than any blade as he stood in the doorway, his arms folded across his chest, his face hard and certain. He was 38 years old, taller than me now, dressed in a crisp shirt that I knew he had not pressed himself. He stared at me like I was some unwelcome guest who had overstayed my welcome. Before I could even catch my breath, Melissa stepped forward. She stood at his side like she always did, her expression smug, her voice loud enough for the cousins and neighbors in the living room to hear. "You should know your place. Stop bothering our family." The words echoed inside my head while the room fell silent for a second. I felt the eyes of everyone shift toward me. I saw my cousin Mark whisper something to his wife. I caught the way my neighbor across the street avoided my gaze, pretending to look down at his drink. Not one person spoke up. Not one. Then Ethan's hand moved, and the door slammed shut, rattling the frame as if he had driven a nail straight through my chest. The sound echoed in my ears as I stood on the porch, with the late afternoon air cold against my skin. For a moment, I did not move. My hand tightened on the strap of the old canvas duffel bag I had carried out with me. Inside were a few shirts, a pair of worn jeans, my shaving kit, and the pocket knife my father had given me decades ago. That was all I had taken from the house I once called mine. I turned slowly, facing the yard, where the grass had grown patchy. My boots scraped against the porch step as I descended, each sound heavy in the silence. Behind the door, I could still hear voices, muffled laughter, Melissa's tone rising above the others. I could picture her smile of victory and Ethan standing proud beside her. As I walked down the driveway, the late summer light caught on the chipped paint of my old Ford pickup parked at the curb. That truck had carried lumber and tools for years when I was still working construction sites across Columbus. Now it looked like it barely belonged on the same street as the newer cars lined neatly in front of the neighbors' homes. I lifted my head and saw a few of them standing on their porches. They pretended not to stare, but their eyes followed me. Some gave a small nod, as if to offer pity, not comfort. My chest burned, but I refused to bow my head. I tightened my jaw and walked to the truck, every step dragging a trail of shame behind me. At the door of the truck, I paused. I set the duffel on the hood and let my hands rest there for a moment. My fingers trembled not from weakness, but from the rage boiling just under the surface. I thought of the boy Ethan once was, the boy who clung to my hand during thunderstorms, who begged me to carry him on my shoulders, to see the fireworks, who looked at me like I was the strongest man in the world. And now he looked at me like I was a burden. I opened the truck door and slid into the worn driver's seat. The springs sagged beneath my weight, the smell of oil and dust filling the cab. For a long moment, I did not turn the key. I just sat there, with my hands on the wheel, staring through the windshield at the house. The same house where I had spent long nights hammering nails, painting walls, laying down floors with sweat dripping into my eyes. The same house where Linda and I had raised Ethan before cancer took her away. And now it was the house where I was told I no longer belonged. I glanced at the rearview mirror and caught my reflection. Lines carved deep into my face, gray scattered in my hair, but behind those eyes still burned something Ethan did not see. I whispered under my breath, barely audible but steady, "This is not the end." The laughter inside the house grew louder, carrying through the walls as if to mock me. My hand turned the key, and the engine sputtered before catching with a low growl. The sound comforted me more than any voice could in that moment. I gripped the wheel tighter, the leather worn smooth from years of use, and pulled out of the driveway. The tires crunched over the gravel as I moved past the mailbox that still bore my last name. I drove slowly down the street past houses where I had once lent tools, once fixed fences, once been invited in for coffee. Now they seemed distant, like scenes from a life that had slipped away. At the corner, I stopped at a red light. The glow reflected across the windshield, bathing the cab in crimson. My heart pounded hard, not only with hurt, but with something sharper, something steadier. I realized this was not just about being thrown out of a house. It was about being stripped of dignity, about hours of sacrifice being erased in an instant. The light changed. I pressed the gas, and the truck rolled forward, the city lights stretching out ahead of me. I did not know exactly where I was going that night. I only knew one thing. Ethan believed he had ended something, but in truth, he had just set something else in motion. The road opened before me, dark but familiar. I left the house behind, left the laughter, and the whispers left the sting of betrayal on that porch. Ahead was silence, and in that silence I felt the first stirrings of resolve. My story was not finished. It was only beginning. I drove until the streetlights thinned and the road opened to a darker stretch outside the neighborhood, and somewhere between one breath and the next, my mind slipped backward to the last summer Linda was alive. Linda's hand felt small in mine, her fingers cool, a wedding band loose from the weight she had lost. "Keep going for him," she said, not a plea, just a truth. The house smelled like sawdust and lemon cleaner, and the last trace of Linda's shampoo that clung to a scarf on the closet shelf. Then the phone would buzz, and the foreman would ask if I could cover nights at the site off Parsons Avenue. I said yes before he finished, because saying yes became the only thing that kept the edges of grief from cutting me open. My hands thickened again to the old rhythm rope and rebar, carving their stories back into my palms. 12 hours turned into 14 when a concrete truck showed up late and someone needed to guide the chute. I sat on a pile of drywall, watched the sky turn from slate to pink, and told myself the ache meant I was still useful. Ethan was 23 then, and halfway through his degree at Ohio State. Tuition had climbed again. He sent me a message that afternoon while I was rinsing dust from my hair in the kitchen sink. "Dad, the payment deadline moved up. I am short this semester." He wrote it like a weather report, factual and simple, the way young men speak when they do not know what anything costs. I wiped my face with a towel and looked at the old Ford in the driveway. I found the title in the metal box in the top of the closet and set it beside my coffee cup. The man at the lot ran his hands along the fender and said the paint was tired. When I signed the papers, I felt the lightness in my pocket, where the keys had always been. There was still a gap after the truck money. I opened the small wooden box from my father. Inside lay the watch he had worn to the mill every day of his life, a face scratched by decades of work, the hands still moving, slow and certain. The man at the jeweler's looked at it through a loupe and said he could give me a fair price. I nodded and set it on the counter, as if I were laying down a piece of myself and telling it to behave. I paid Ethan's tuition online at the library computer because the old desktop at home wheezed and froze after every third page. When the confirmation flashed, I felt something loosen in my chest, a knot releasing, and I thought of Linda's hand on my arm, that last day, the way she had said, "Keep going," as if it was as simple as turning the next page. At the site, the work thickened that fall. Hank, a man with hands like shovels and a laugh that shook his whole chest, handed me a bottle of water and said I was killing myself on these nights. I told him I was making rent on a future. He clapped my shoulder and said the future better send a thank you card. Saturdays belonged to the house. Pipes to tighten, grout to scrub. I would find Ethan in the kitchen between shifts, his eyes rimmed with the kind of tired that comes from studying at 2 in the morning. He would say he was hungry, and I would scramble eggs and burn the toast, and we would eat over the sink because the counter was piled with mail. I said, "Just finish what you started." He nodded and said, "Thanks, Dad." And in that moment, I believed the ledger between us would always balance in ways that had nothing to do with money. There were good days, too. Days when the blue of the sky was so clean it felt like a new shirt. Days when a foreman said good work and meant it. Days when I would stop by the cemetery with a coffee and lean against Linda's stone and tell her the little victories. The truck is gone, but the tuition is covered. Ethan is keeping his grades up. I am holding steady. The leaves would skitter over the grass, and I would pretend that sound was her answer. I remember one fall game at a local field years earlier when Ethan was 10 and his team needed one run. He had struck out twice already, his chin tucked to his chest, and he looked at me from the on-deck circle and asked if I would carry him on my shoulders if he got on base. I told him yes, like a fool, like a father, and he cracked a single so clean it sounded like a bell. After the game, he climbed onto me, small hands gripping my hair, and he shouted to his friends that his dad was his hero. I wore that light like a jacket for years. There is a sound your back makes when you stand too fast after tying a line of rebar. In January, a beam slipped and grazed my shoulder. I went home with a bruise the size of a grapefruit and told Ethan it was nothing. He nodded without looking up from his textbook. When spring came, I caught him in the garage sorting old boxes for a move into an apartment closer to campus. He found the photo of me holding him on my shoulders at that baseball field. He smiled at it for a heartbeat, then set it aside like a receipt from a store he had stopped visiting. I told him the lease would be tight. He said he had it handled. I drove him over with a borrowed truck, carried his mattress up 2 flights, and listened to him talk about internships and plans and things he would do in a city far from ours. I was proud. I was also afraid of the quiet that would follow him out the door. I learned to stretch $1 until it squealed. I bought a bus pass and a used bicycle and told my legs to remember what hills felt like. On those nights, I talked to Linda again there in the low hum of the heater. I told her I did not know if I was doing any of it right, but I was doing it all the same. Years slipped forward the way water runs under a bridge, quiet and certain. Ethan finished school, found a job selling office space for a firm downtown, learned to knot ties I never owned. He grew into the kind of man who walked fast and scanned emails while he ate. I watched him and thought it had all been worth it. I thought the house would always be a place we both returned to in different ways, that the beam I lifted and the check I wrote and the hours I traded would hold. The light at the next intersection turned green, and I eased the truck along the memory, thinning like fog. In my mind, the image of 10-year-old Ethan on my shoulders blazed once more, his laughter bright and easy. Then the picture shuttered, and the present snapped in the look he had given me at the door, cool and distant. The shift from boy to man felt as sudden as a door slamming in a quiet room. I kept my hands on the wheel and let the past settle back where it belonged, a weight I knew how to carry. The house on Maplewood Drive did not come from blueprints on some architect's desk. It came from the cracks in my hands and the sweat that soaked through my shirts every season of its making. I remember standing in the empty lot after selling the small bungalow Linda and I had first bought when we were newly married. I dug the first trenches for the foundation myself, my shovel biting into clay, my back stiff and sore but unwilling to stop. Friends from the job site came on weekends to help frame the walls. We hauled beams together, raised them with a grunt and a laugh, and at the end of the day we would sit on overturned buckets, drinking warm soda, and staring at the skeleton of what would become home. I paid them in pizza and borrowed favors, But mostly they came because we all knew what it meant for a man to try and build something lasting for his family. When money ran short, I skipped lunches, sold my tools one by one, and took side jobs to keep the bills steady. The kitchen cabinets came from salvaged wood. The doors hung crooked at first, until I planed them down again and again, until they fit flush. Linda would come by after her shift at the elementary school, before the sickness hollowed her. She carried sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, smiling, as she watched Ethan, only 12 at the time, hammering nails halfway in and bending them sideways. She would laugh and say, "At least he is learning." I kept those bent nails in a jar on the garage shelf, a reminder that even mistakes could be part of the story of a house. When the house finally stood complete, it was not perfect, but it was ours, raised by my hands and blessed by Linda's prayers. Ethan had moved into the biggest bedroom, plastering the walls with posters of ball players and bands, while Linda filled the kitchen with the smell of stew and cornbread. Now, when I look at it from the sidewalk, it stares back at me like a stranger. The yard is trimmed too neat, the hedges squared off with angles that look more like a catalog than a family home. The swing Ethan once begged me to hang from the maple tree is gone, cut down, and replaced with a patio set. The laughter of neighborhood kids has been replaced by the hum of Melissa's book club meetings, where they sit in my living room sipping wine, pretending it was always theirs. I stand at the edge of the grass, my boots sinking slightly into the soft earth, and I cannot help but feel the clash of memory against reality. I see 12-year-old Ethan carrying boards with me, wiping sweat from his brow, asking if the walls would be strong enough to keep out storms. And then I see the man he has become standing in that doorway, only hours earlier, telling me it was not my house. Once neighbors used to wave when they walked by, proud of what I had managed to build. They knew the hours I worked, the sacrifices I made to raise those walls. Now they wave at Ethan, congratulating him on promotions, on the house, on the family he has built inside it. They believe the story he tells, that he bought the place, that he provides for everyone under that roof, including the old man who lives in the back room. My silence has become the wall that cages me. I remember the night I finished installing the front door. When it finally clicked shut, I stood back and felt pride swell in my chest. Linda leaned against me and whispered that we had built a fortress. That door was supposed to guard us, to hold us together. Tonight, it had been slammed in my face, its wood no longer protection, but rejection. The porch light spills across the yard, now warm and golden, but it does not welcome me. It casts me into sharper relief, an outsider caught in its beam. I think of the years I scrubbed mud from Ethan's cleats on those steps, the winters we shoveled snow side by side, the nights Linda and I rocked on the porch swing, talking about nothing and everything. All of it has been painted over, replaced, erased by the story Ethan and Melissa now tell about this house. I take a step back, the weight of memory pressing against my chest. My fists clench at my sides, nails digging into skin, not because I want to fight, but because I want to hold on to something real. The house looms above me, familiar yet foreign, and I realize with a painful clarity that it no longer belongs to me, not in the eyes of the people inside. To them, I am a guest who should be grateful, a man allowed to stay under sufferance, nothing more. The truth that every inch of this place was built from my sweat and sacrifice has been buried beneath Ethan's pride and Melissa's control. The maple tree at the side of the yard rustles in the night breeze, leaves brushing each other like whispers. I remember hanging that swing for Ethan, his small hands gripping the rope, his laughter ringing into the evening sky. I remember pushing him higher and higher, his voice carrying that simple declaration, "Dad, you are my hero." I blink and the sound vanishes, replaced by the memory of his voice tonight, flat and cold, telling me I was just staying there. The swing is gone, the laughter gone, and so is the boy who once believed in me. I stand there longer than I should, staring at the house as if it might open its arms again, but it never does. Instead, it stands firm, claiming me as nothing but a shadow on the sidewalk. My chest aches with the cruel twist of it, that the fortress I built to protect us has become the place of my humiliation. At last, I turn away my boots, crunching against the gravel, the light fading behind me. The night swallows me whole, and with it the truth settles hard in my bones. The home I carved out of sweat and blood has been rewritten as a cage, and I am the one they have cast out. Melissa stood at the island, with a paper in her hand, and a tight smile that did not reach her eyes. She said she had been cleaning and found something interesting. $50, she said, for shoes. You are old already. What do you need new shoes for? I looked down at my boots. The sole on the right one had split where the ball of my foot took the most weight. I had glued it twice. I told her my feet had been swelling. I said the doctor at the clinic told me to wear better support. She said we have house expenses. We have a mortgage. We have groceries for a family. She said, you can ask next time. Ethan wandered in with his coffee shirt sleeves rolled tie draped loose around his neck. He took the receipt from her fingers and scanned it like it was a report from work. He said, 50 is not much, but it adds up, Dad. That week they began collecting my slips without asking. A grocery receipt was held up to the light to point out a jar of medicated balm. She said, what is this? I said a socket wrench set the cheapest one they had. I thought I would fix it after dinner, I said. They started a folder on the sideboard. Accountability. She said we are managing a household now, and there is no room for surprises. I said my doctor had told me to watch my calcium and D. I told her winter was coming. The drawer where I kept my wallet and keys moved one day. Melissa said the kitchen would flow better if we used the mudroom hooks and the little tray near the garage door. My things found their way to the tray, and my wallet found its way to her hands when she did weekend budgets at the table. She said you should let Ethan handle these. He is good with numbers. I caught Ethan's eyes over her shoulder. On a Sunday afternoon, I came home with a small bag from the hardware store. A box of screws, a roll of plumber's tape, a clamp for a squeaky return vent, and a $2 pack of felt pads for the chairs, because the scraping sound on the wood made my teeth ache. Ethan took the bag and rummaged through it, as if he were checking for contraband. I told him I could stop the faucet and the vent from making noise. He said the landlord of this house is me, and landlords hire pros. At dinner that night, the conversation turned to a networking event Melissa wanted to host. She looked around the dining room, eyes landing on the old sideboard Linda had found at a thrift shop years ago. Ethan looked at me like he expected agreement. I said Linda loved that piece. Later, after the dishes, I heard them in the kitchen going through a stack of mail. She said, here is the utility bill higher than last month, and here is the gas, and here is a charge for a card I do not recognize. Ethan said Dad has a card for the joint account. Melissa said that is the problem. Then she called me back to the island and laid out a half-dozen slips like a poker hand. I picked up one that showed $23 at a discount store. Work gloves and sanding sponges. The garage shelf I had built years ago was sagging. I wanted to reinforce it before it failed. Then she picked up the shoe receipt again. She said the shoes are vanity. You do not need them. She said you are a guest here. The words hit like a brick to the ribs. I looked past her to the window, where the porch light threw a warm cone over the steps, and I remembered sealing that light fixture with silicone to keep the rain from creeping in. I remembered Ethan at 12 holding the ladder and telling me he would get taller than me someday. I blinked, and the window reflected only the three of us in the kitchen, separate as furniture. He said, "Come on, Dad, we are not the enemy. We just need you to coordinate. Things run smoother that way. You have a tendency to act first and think later. That is what gets you in trouble. I wanted to tell him that acting first is what built the beams above his head, that thinking later is what men do when they dry their hands from the concrete and go home to make dinner, that sometimes survival looks like movement. Instead, I said I was sorry. Old habits. They kept the folder on the table that week. If a package arrived with tools for Ethan's grill, no one said a word. If Melissa brought home a candle that cost as much as one of my boots, she called it ambiance and set it in the center of the table. The control was not just in the money. It was in the way Melissa announced the grocery list without asking if I needed anything. It was in how Ethan decided the thermostat setting and told me to put on a sweater if the mornings felt cold. I started keeping the small papers I still had a say over in a plain envelope in my room. Not to hide, to remember. To remind myself that I still made choices even if they were small ones. One evening after Ethan got home late, Ty loosened phone still buzzing in his pocket. Melissa called me back to the island again. I said you found it in the drawer because I kept it to track the return window in case they did not fit. She said, you are old already. What do you need new shoes for? Ethan said, and this toolkit really. Lately you have been throwing money around. Are we trying to prove something? I felt something tug inside my chest. Not anger. Not exactly. I said the faucet needed help, the vent needed a clamp, and the shelf needed a brace. Then she flicked the shoe receipt toward me. She said all this money is from Ethan, not from you. Ethan watched my face to see what I would do. I picked up the receipt and folded it once, then again, and slid it into my pocket. I said, I hear you. I walked down the hall to my room and closed the door softly. I took the receipt out and set it with the others in the envelope, aligning the edges as if neatness could keep me from fraying. My hands found the top drawer and paused there. Then I slid it open, felt for the smooth spine of a folder I had not touched in a while, and rested my palm on it without taking it out. I let my breath even. I sat there in the dark long enough for my eyes to learn the room again. The faint outline of the dresser. The chair with my jacket folded over the back. The square of window breathing a thin wash of streetlight across the floor. Without trying, I drifted to the one person who had ever managed to steady me with a sentence, Evelyn Carter from up in Cleveland, the only lawyer I have ever trusted without reservation. I met Evelyn at a church fundraiser the spring after Linda died, when I was a man walking through rooms like a ghost. We got to talking about the project on Maplewood, about how I was trying to build something that would outlast the ache. She asked me straight if I had a plan to protect the house. I said the house was simple, my name on the deed, mortgage, paid taxes, current. She told me about living trusts, about how they work like a sturdy box, about how you put the things you must protect inside before the storm comes. She handed me a yellow pad and asked me to list what mattered. She wrote quickly, slowing only to ask if I wanted the trust to carry my last name or something quieter. She explained that a trust is only as strong as the things you actually place in it. We went to a notary and signed until my hand cramped. We drove to the county recorder, not in Cleveland, but back in Franklin County, where the house sits, and filed the new deed. On the drive back, I told her I was not sure how to explain any of it to Ethan. She said, you do not have to explain it until you want to. I nodded and tucked the folder behind the seat like contraband and drove home with the strange lightness that follows good choices. At the kitchen table that night, I made a list of accounts to retitle. A savings account at Huntington. A small certificate that would mature in 3 years. I did not change everything. I left a checking account alone because I still needed to pay for groceries and oil changes and birthdays. Later, when Ethan suggested a joint account to streamline bills, I agreed, telling myself it would make things easier, while the important parts of my life were already inside that sturdy box. I told no one what was in and what was not. In the years that followed, I added one more thing to the trust. A small place out near Hocking Hills, a cottage that needed more love than money. I bought it with a mix of savings and a price that belonged to a different decade than signed what needed signing, so the title went straight into the box. It was enough to know it was there. A floorboard settled in the hallway outside my room and returned the house to the present. I opened the drawer, the wood sliding with a whisper, and found the folder by touch. The cardstock was smooth and familiar edges slightly softened from the times I had checked it, then put it away again. I carried it to the bed and set it down as if it were a living thing. The first page was the trust itself pages that said in precise language who held what and who would decide when others could not. I traced the signatures with my thumb. Mine. Evelyn's as witness. The notary stamp flaring up like a small sun. Behind that sat the deed to Maplewood, recorded in October of 2015, the legal description long and fussy, the coordinates of my life captured in a paragraph that only a surveyor would admire. I flipped to the schedule that listed the assets line by line the way careful people do their counting. Savings account ending in a string of numbers. Series E bonds that once bought me a Christmas coat. A note about the cottage deed recorded the following spring. I heard my name once in Melissa's voice from the far end of the hall. The television murmured. The house breathed its thin winter breath. I closed my eyes for a moment and saw Linda's hands smoothing a tablecloth. Saw Ethan's cowlick from a year when he refused to let me cut his hair. Saw Evelyn's pen pausing above a line when she wanted me to be sure. You are not hiding, she had said. You are preparing. The difference matters. The folder held a letter dated the week we finished the filings. Evelyn had written it in her neat block script so there would be no misunderstanding. Keep copies in 2 places. Review beneficiaries every few years. Never sign anything in a hurry if it involves title or authority. Call before you feel cornered. The words might as well have been a map curled in a bottle. I had kept to that map even when the path looked like ordinary living. It was the ordinary that saves you in a storm. I laid everything back in order and sat quietly. There was a time I would have marched back to the kitchen and laid the papers on the island and forced Ethan to read each line until his certainty cracked. Age teaches a different strength. Timing is its own kind of force. I had placed what mattered where it could not be snatched in a single angry night, and I had done it years before anyone thought of taking anything from me. The realization slid into me like warmth after a cold walk. I set the folder on my lap and let my hands rest on it. I was not powerless, only waiting for the right moment to move. The thought did not come like a shout. It came like the steady hum of an engine that had always been running quiet under the noise of hurt and habit. I nodded once in the still room and felt my shoulders loosen. There was nothing to prove tonight. There was only this simple fact I had built into the bones of my life. What needed protecting was already protected. I slipped the folder back into the drawer and pushed it closed until it clicked. The lamp went dark with a soft snap, and the room returned to its gentle shape. From the street, a car passed tires whispering over wet pavement. I lay back and let my eyes follow the faint pattern of light on the ceiling until even that thinned. Outside, the house settled again. Inside, I let the quiet rise and fall until sleep found me, my palm still remembering the cool weight of paper that did exactly what it was made to do. I was already at the table in the quiet hands wrapped around a warm mug, the house still rubbing sleep from its eyes. Footsteps came down the hall light and careful, and Abby appeared in the doorway with her hair pulled into a loose knot, the sleeves of a sweatshirt pushed to her elbows. She was 19 and home for the weekend from Ann Arbor, the kind of weekend that looks ordinary from the outside and changes. She poured a second cup without asking and set it in front of me. "Grandpa, I believe you." I looked up and saw that her eyes were wet but steady. She pulled out the chair beside me and sat so close, our knees almost touched. "I saw Mom with the receipts last night," she said, voice low. "I heard her talking to Dad after. She said you should not buy anything without checking with them first. She said you were careless. That is not fair." I took a breath and let it out slow. "Thank you for the coffee," I said. "You did not have to get up this early." She shrugged and tried to smile. "I could not sleep. I kept thinking about the swing you hung for me when I was little. I kept thinking about how they talked to you like you did not build any of this. They think I do not notice things," she said. "Like when Mom brings home a candle that costs more than my textbooks and calls it atmosphere. Or when Dad orders takeout for his team and puts it on a card like it is nothing. But you buy a pair of shoes and it becomes a meeting." I felt something warm and painful rise behind my ribs. I reached over and rested my hand on the table near hers. She did not pull away. She shifted her eyes toward the hallway and then back to me. "You built this house," she said. "I remember you fixing things before I even knew what a wrench was. I remember you teaching me which direction tightens a screw. I remember you carrying me in from the car when I fell asleep and waking up on the couch with a blanket over me. I remember all of it. So when they say you are a guest, it makes me feel sick." She told the truth and let it sit there. "I am all right," I said. "I am not made of glass. And sometimes people say things they will wish they could take back." "Dad will not take it back," she said. "He thinks being right is the same as being strong. And Mom likes being in charge. She thinks it makes her safe." Abby reached into the pocket of her sweatshirt and pulled out a folded bill. "I have a little cash from my campus job," she said. "Let me help with groceries this week." I slid the bill back toward her gently. "You keep that," I said. "You are the one eating cafeteria sandwiches and paying for laundry by the quarter. Besides, there is plenty of food in this house." She took a sip and changed the subject in the way the best people do with kindness. "Do you still have your toolkit?" she asked. "The bathroom fan upstairs rattles like it is trying to shake itself free. I can help you fix it while Mom is out." I watched a video about it. It looks simple. I told her where to find the step stool and the old screwdriver with the chipped red handle. She got up to look, then froze halfway to the pantry as Melissa's footsteps came down the hall. "Morning," Melissa said. "I am meeting with the caterer at noon," she said. "Ethan wants the presentation perfect on Friday. And Abby, you need to keep your door closed if you are going to study that late." The light carries down the hall. "I will keep it closed," Abby said. She kept her tone neutral, polite. "We have to be mindful of spending this month," she said. "There are a lot of moving parts. That means no extras." She simply spoke clear and level. "He needed shoes, Mom." "We have a system," she said. "It works best when everyone respects it." She walked to the sink, rinsed her mug, and set it upside down on the rack. When she turned back, her eyes had softened again. "I am sorry," she said. "I did not mean to start anything." "You did not," I said. "You told the truth. The house can stand it." She came back to the table and lowered herself into the chair. "Promise me something," she said. "Promise me you will not let them make you small." I let the words find a place in me and stay there. I nodded. Then I reached out and touched the back of her hand. "I need to take care of a few things this week," I said. "Errands, paperwork, nothing dramatic. You are not dramatic, Grandpa. You are precise. I am on your side, she said. Always. I stood and walked to my room, closed the door with the soft click of a man who has learned how to move without stirring the water he lives in. I carried it to the bed and set it down, then opened to the page where Evelyn had written reminders in neat block letters. Review beneficiaries every few years. Keep copies in 2 places. Do not sign under pressure. I found the sheet where current designations were listed. I reached for a pen and wrote Abby's full name on a note card, along with her date of birth and a phone number she would answer. I tucked the card into the folder and then pulled it back out and placed it on top, a promise made visible. There are moments a man can feel the axle of his life shift, a small, precise movement that changes the way the wheels carry weight. I did not feel powerful. I felt correct. The line from me to the people I loved had become frayed in places. This was how I tied a new knot. I set the folder on the dresser and opened the top drawer to find an envelope. I addressed it to Evelyn in Cleveland, her street committed to memory years ago from the day we put the first papers in the mail. I did not enclose anything yet. I wanted to call first to hear her measured voice to tell her that the time had come to update the names. When I returned to the kitchen, Abby had left a note by the stove. Going for a run back in 40. I folded the note and put it in my pocket, as if it were a receipt I would never let anyone throw away. I stood there for a minute with my hands in my pockets and the air cool on my face. I turned back toward the hall, thinking of the note card on my dresser and the name written there in my careful hand, and felt the day settle into place. I packed slowly that afternoon, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted my hands to move with care. I folded 2 changes of clothes into the canvas duffel, added my shaving kit, a flashlight, the old pocket knife, and the folder that mattered more than any of it. I told no one I was leaving. I drove out of Columbus in a thin stream of headlights past the stadium, where crowds would return in the fall, past the last rows of streetlights that end at the edge of ordinary life. I took 33 toward Lancaster, then the smaller 2-lane roads that thread through woods and fields toward Hocking Hills. It was close to 10 when I pulled into the gravel drive of the cottage. The headlights swung across the small porch, catching the railing I had mended last spring, and the clay pot where I keep spare keys tucked behind a dead geranium. I set the duffel on the chair and stood for a moment, letting the stillness of the place unspool the knot between my shoulders. I switched on the lamp by the table and the room gathered itself. I made tea on the little stove and set the folder down, then opened it with the same respect I would give to a tool that can save a life. The first pages were the trust itself. I read the lines I had read a dozen times already, each one a plank laid on a path I had chosen years ago. Then the deed to Maplewood recorded in October 2015, a legal description of the coordinates of everything that had happened under that roof. A schedule followed, careful and plain. Savings account at Huntington balance last month, $280,000 and change. A small certificate due next fall. Bonds I had carried across decades like a quiet river. The cottage deed recorded the following spring. I set the trust papers to one side and pulled out the thin binder where I keep account screens printed every few months. I spread the papers in a row, checked dates, made small notes in the margin with the same pencil I used to mark studs before I cut. Then I took the envelope stamped with Evelyn's address in Cleveland and laid it on the table. I would call first. I brought over the little box with my checkbooks and keys. The joint account with Ethan was never my comfort, and now it was nothing but risk. I wrote down the routing and account numbers on a card, along with the customer service line, placed the card in front of the lamp, and set my phone beside it. Tomorrow morning at 9 sharp, I would call. I would verify, request what was mine, and close what needed closing. Abby's note from the morning folded in my pocket, found the table, and rested there as if it had been part of the plan from the start. Going for a run back in 40. I set the note card with her full name beside it. I imagined Evelyn's face when I told her I wanted to update beneficiaries. She would nod slow and sure and ask if I had the correct spelling. She would tell me the steps, and I would follow them. I stood and crossed to the window. The woods beyond the yard were a dark wall, the kind that does not threaten, only protects. A barred owl called from somewhere to the left, and then again. I thought of Linda then. Not the hospital version of her, but the one who tightened a cabinet hinge when I had missed the last quarter turn, who folded shirts in threes with a rhythm you felt in your bones, who told me once that doing a thing quietly is its own kind of bravery. I went back to the table and wrote a list in block letters. Call bank at 9, verify joint account balance request, equal disbursement, close joint authority, confirm trust. Accounts, no changes without trustee consent. Schedule appointment with Evelyn, update beneficiaries to include Abigail Rowan, attach contact information and school address for reference. Scan documents at the library in Laurelville if needed. Make copies, place one set here, one set in the lockbox at Huntington. The phone sat quiet on the table for a long time. Then I picked it up and scrolled to Evelyn. I stared at her name and thought about courtesy and timing and what it means to ask for help when the house is asleep. She had told me once to call before I felt cornered. I was not cornered. I was choosing to move. I pressed the green button anyway. She answered on the second ring, her voice clear in that way some voices are no matter the hour. I told her I was at the cottage. I told her the broad outlines without bleeding. I said I wanted to bring beneficiaries up to date and to handle the joint account in the morning. I said I did not want to fight. I wanted precision. She listened until I stopped speaking. Then she said what she always says when she wants me to hear the spine of a thing. You prepared for this years ago. You are not starting from zero. Tomorrow, call the bank. Speak calmly. Ask them to confirm the balance and to split the funds according to the account rules. Close the joint authority. Then come to Cleveland, and we will update the trust schedules and beneficiary designations. And David, she said, it is time they learned who actually owns what. The words landed like a level against a board, showing me the true line. I felt the heat behind my eyes that comes when someone names the thing you have been circling. I thanked her. She said, write everything down. Names, times, confirmation numbers. She said, bring the deeds and the last two statements. She said she would clear her afternoon. Then she told me to get some sleep because men do poor work on a tired brain. I promised her I would try. When the call ended, the cottage seemed warmer. I turned the list so the lamplight washed it clean, then added another line. Record call details. Keep copies. No signatures under pressure. These are not new rules. They are old rails I laid for myself so I would not slip when the weather changed. I closed the folder and slid it into the middle drawer of the table, the one that sticks a little at the back. I left the note card with Abby's name on top, tucked under the corner of the lamp, so it would not drift if the window breathed. I washed the mug in the small sink and set it upside down, listening to the tiny sound of porcelain meeting wood. The night had deepened. The cottage settled the way a person does when they have finally found a comfortable angle. In the bedroom, I left the duffel on the chair and pulled back the quilt. The sheets smelled faintly of cedar. I sat for a moment on the edge of the bed and let the day replay once without sound. Then I let it go. The plan now had weight and shape. The first cut would be clean. The next would be careful. I lay down and watched the window square gray against the dark, the leaves outside moving in a wind I could not hear. Sleep came the way a good engine hums strong, and even carrying me without strain into the part of the night where decisions rest and gather their strength for morning. I woke before the alarm. The trees outside the cottage were still. I boiled water, made coffee strong, and laid out the folder on the oak table. At 9 on the dot, I dialed the bank from the number inked on the card I had written the night before. The line clicked, and a woman with a calm voice asked for my name, my address on Maplewood, the last 4 of my number, the balance I believed was in the joint account. I answered each piece without hurry. She tapped keys, paused, and then confirmed the figure. I asked her to disperse my share according to the account rules and to close joint authority going forward. I listened. I asked her to repeat the confirmation number, then wrote it down twice, once on the page and once on a card. I called the trust department next and verified the status of the accounts there. Everything in order, no changes without trustee consent. Then I called Huntington and asked a clerk I have known for years to expect me later in the week to place a set of documents in the lockbox. He said he would be there. I wrote his name beside the time and folded the list once. By late morning, the light had turned warm in the windows. I ate a sandwich standing at the counter and cleaned the plate immediately. My phone sat face down by the lamp. It did not ring. I pictured Columbus at noon. I did not yet know how the next hour would unfold, but later the pieces would be handed to me by more than one source, and I would see it as clearly as if I had been there. Ethan left his office near Broad and High with 2 colleagues at his shoulder. They walked toward a busy deli a few blocks from the square. He told a story about a client he was sure he would land by October. They ordered like men who expect to be served. 2 turkey clubs, extra bacon, 1 pastrami with a side of slaw, 3 coffees, 2 sparkling waters, and a box of cookies for the office. Ethan set his phone on the counter and reached for the card he always used when the bill was meant to signal something about his place in the room. The cashier rang them up and slid the reader around. Ethan inserted the card. The machine blinked. A soft chirp. The cashier frowned at the tiny screen and then at Ethan. Declined. She said it again, a little louder because the machine insisted. Declined. Ethan blinked as if he had been woken. He told the cashier to try again. One of his colleagues shifted his weight and looked toward the door. The second attempt made the same small electronic noise. The cashier lifted her eyes and this time used the voice that can cut through a lunch rush. Declined. Ethan reached for his wallet and produced another card. He fumbled it, caught it, and tried to hand it to the cashier. The cashier shook her head and tapped the screen. She said the total had to be closed or voided. She said it would be easier if someone else paid and he could settle up later. One of his colleagues offered a quick suggestion that he could grab the coffees and he would take the rest. Ethan insisted he could handle it. He spoke in a louder voice, the one that has worked for him in conference rooms and on sales calls. He said, "There must be a mistake." The cashier slid the check to the side and said she would help the next in line while he sorted it out. A gap opened where his purchase should have been. He stood in it, red climbing up his neck. His colleagues stepped left and paid for their food without looking directly at him. He gathered his things without a plan. He told his men he had a call to make and would meet them back at the office. He jabbed the screen of his phone with a thumb that had started to shake and walked fast toward a bench he hoped would offer a little shade. I wiped the table with a damp cloth and squared the folder with the edge of the lamp. The woods had started to move, a breeze cutting a new path through oak leaves. But I felt the floor under my feet come level in a way it had not in a long time. I learned later that Ethan sat on that bench for several seconds before he could dial. He waited through the prompts and pressed 0 until a human voice answered. He gave his name with a clipped edge. He asked what was wrong with his card and why he had been embarrassed in front of his team. The representative asked for verification. He provided it careful but fast. Then she did what bank representatives do. Sir, the joint account was modified this morning at 9:30. The CO holder requested a disbursement according to account rules, and joint spending authority has been closed. She offered to repeat the confirmation number. He did not write it down. He asked what funds remained. She told him. It was not what he expected to hear. He took a breath that did not help. Then he told her there had to be a mistake. The representative did not agree. She said the action was within rights. She said any further questions could be directed to the branch or to a supervisor. He thanked her in the tone a man uses when he wants to end something before he breaks in public. He ended the call and sat very still. I had finished wiping the table by the time the light shifted to late afternoon. I stepped onto the porch and stood with my hands in my pockets. Somewhere a truck downshifted on a distant hill. The day had made its turn. My phone lit on the table inside a rectangle of light in the corner of my eye. The name on the screen was the one I expected. I stood in the doorway for a long second and watched it ring. Then I let it go dark. The woods returned to their own sounds, and the house returned to its quiet. I picked up the folder and set it back in the drawer, then sat down. The engine I had started was running smoothly. The road ahead was clear enough for the next mile. I spent the early afternoon putting the cottage in order. I stacked the documents back in their folder, lined up my notes, and wiped the table clean. The phone on the lamp base lit again with Ethan's name, a steady pulse that I let expire. The woods carried a small wind leaves turning their pale sides. What happened next unfolded miles away in a downtown parking lane, but the outlines reached me later from more than one angle. Ethan slid into the driver's seat of his sedan. He set his phone on his knee for a second, then pressed the bank's number. He waded through the recorded options and jabbed 0 until a person answered. When the representative asked for verification, he delivered it in clipped phrases, name and address on Maplewood, last 4 digits, and the approximate balance he expected in the joint account. He set his jaw when he said that number. The representative put him on a brief hold. The voice returned. It was calm and clear. She said the joint account had been modified at 9:30 that morning. She said the CO holder had requested disbursement according to the rules of the account. She said the current status showed equal division. Then she read the figures. 174,000 as of opening business. 87,000 transferred to the CO holder's separate account. The remainder available under his name with no joint authority. He told her there had to be an error. He said the CO holder had no right. The representative did not argue. She explained that under United States banking rules, each party to a joint account possesses equal authority to withdraw or close. She offered to provide the internal reference number and suggested he might wish to visit a branch if he needed printed confirmation. He said it again, louder this time, that the other party could not do this. She said again that each party could. He asked when it happened. She repeated the time, 9:30. He tried to make his voice smaller. He said there were circumstances. He said he had responsibilities. The representative said she understood. He ended the call. He sat very still with the phone dark in his hand. He placed his forehead against the heel of his palm. Then he looked up and saw 2 of his colleagues walking past on the sidewalk, the same men who had watched him stand at the counter 10 minutes earlier. Ethan looked down at the cup holder, and he did not wave. He picked up both coffees so he would have something to carry, and stepped out into the light. Back at the cottage, I took a slow walk to the porch and sat for a minute on the top step. The boards flexed under my weight and then held. A squirrel stitched the fence line tail high. My phone lit again. This time I let it ring twice before I answered. I said my name. There was a pause. Ethan asked what I had done. He said the bank had humiliated him. I told him to take a breath and listen. I said the bank had followed the terms of the account exactly. I said joint means equal and equal means equal. He said equal does not apply here. He said I knew what he meant. I told him I did. He told me he had a team to lead and clients to meet. I told him. He demanded a reversal. I told him there would be none. He told me I was ungrateful. Then I said we could talk when he was ready to speak without raising his voice. I ended the call. Later, in a calmer hour, I phoned the bank again to confirm what I already knew. A different representative reviewed the action line by line. She read the same confirmation number I had written. She told me the account reflected separate balances now, and that no further joint transactions could be made. She asked if I wanted a paper letter mailed to the address on file. I told her yes, and spelled the street to avoid a mistake no one needed. I brought the folder out again and made a column for the day. Time of my call. Name of representative. Confirmation number. Time of his call according to his voicemail timestamp. Summary of what he was told. I wrote the word equal and underlined it once. The rest of what happened in Columbus came to me in small pieces. A text from Abby later in the afternoon that said, "Dad is upset, are you safe?" A message from a cousin who worked in the same building as Ethan, mentioning that he had left a meeting early. In his car, Ethan started the engine and let the air run until the heat lifted. He placed one of the coffees on the curb and left it there. He drove around the block twice, then parked in the garage under his office. He sent a message to Melissa that said, "Call me as soon as you can," and another to a colleague that said he would catch up on the call later. I cleaned the small kitchen without hurry. The knife went back to its place on the magnetic strip. I opened the window a few inches and let the smell of damp leaves come in. My phone buzzed again on the table. A voicemail icon appeared. I pressed play and listened. He demanded a call back. He told me I was making a mistake. He told me money does not move without consequences. He asked if I understood what I had set in motion. I saved it and wrote the time in the margin. I sat and read the list for the afternoon. Scan the documents in Laurelville. Check the lockbox appointment. Draft an email to Evelyn with the points we had covered. I put the cap on the pen and set it at the top of the page. Somewhere in the city, he carried his coffee back into an office. I stood, slid the folder into the drawer. The road I had chosen did not require speed. It required steps taken in the right order. I picked up my keys and listened as I turned toward the door. A car door thumped, quick footsteps crossed the small porch, and a fist met the wood with a tight rhythm that belonged to a bad mood. I opened the door and found Ethan on the top step, face drawn thin, Melissa just behind him, with her arms folded and her jaw set. "We need to talk," he said, and pushed past me into the room. I shut the door and let the latch catch. The oak table waited under the lamp. I walked to it, pulled out a chair, and sat. I did not tell them to sit, but they did more out of habit than respect. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and spoke first. "What you did at the bank was out of line. You embarrassed me in front of my team. You took money that was keeping this family running. Undo it. The joint account was split according to its rules. Equal means equal. There is nothing to undo." "Equal," she said. "You want to talk about equal? We have been carrying you. Groceries, utilities, events for his work. You spend on nonsense and then you tell yourself stories about principle. Then I reached for the drawer and brought out the folder. I set it down and opened it to the page that holds the deed. My finger rested on the line that matters, the one the county clerk stamped in October of 2015. We can circle bills all afternoon, I said, or we can look at what is true. The house you are living in does not belong to you. It belongs to the trust I created 10 years ago. I am the trustee. The title moved then. It has never moved back. That is not possible, she said. It is his house. Everyone knows it is his house. His name is on everything. The deed is what decides ownership. The county recorder stamped this. The legal description is linked to that parcel on Maplewood. It sits in this trust. I signed it with a notary and a witness, and the county accepted it. It is not a rumor. It is a record. Then why have you been living there, he said. Why the joint account? Why any of it? Because I am your father, and for years I believed the easiest way to keep the peace was to let small confusions stand, I said. I helped where I could. I stayed quiet when I should have corrected the story. That was my mistake. This is the correction. You cannot just spring this on us, she said. There is a mortgage. There are expenses. There are plans. There is no mortgage, I said. I paid it off before Linda died. Property taxes exist. Insurance exists. Utilities exist. You can call those expenses. You cannot call them a mortgage just because the word feels bigger. So you set this up to trap us, he said. You sat on it waiting for a moment to embarrass me. You could have talked to me like a man. I did, I said, for years. Talking only works if both people are listening. Today is not about embarrassment. It is about accuracy. He stood and began to move a tight circle at the end of the table. He said, we have poured money into that place. We made it look like something. We hosted. We networked. That benefits you too. I nodded once. If you want to talk about contributions, we can do that. If you want to talk about ownership, we do it with records and law. She read the trust name under her breath. Her eyes flicked to the next page, to the signature block. She pressed her lips together. When did you do all this? She asked softer. 10 years ago, I said. A lawyer in Cleveland helped me. We filed what needed filing. We placed what needed protecting where it would stay protected. We did it then so that today would not become a scramble. If the trust owns the house, then what is your end game, he said. Do you plan to evict your own son? Is that what this is? I am not here to throw anyone out. I am here to put boundaries back where they belong. This is my home. You are making a scene, she said. This is dramatic. No, I said. This is a document on a table. Ethan's eyes moved from the deed to my face and back again. You needed me, he said. You have been living under my roof. I have been the one carrying this family. I shook my head. That story ends here. I helped build that roof with my hands. I moved the title 10 years ago with my judgment. I have accounts that do not rely on your approval. I let you talk as if the world owed you for putting up with me. That was my error. I am correcting it now. Melissa found her seat again. Ethan tried one more door. Can we at least agree this was handled poorly, he said. You blindsided me. You should have come to me. We could have made a plan together. No, I said. Plans are made between people who keep their word. Between people who share respect. For months, you and Melissa have spoken to me like I am a child who needs an allowance. You have told friends and family that you keep me. You have counted my receipts at your kitchen island and called it stewardship. Then you closed a door in my face in front of neighbors and cousins. I am done trusting the kind of plan that forgets who I am. So what now, he said. Now you go home and calm down, I said. Tomorrow I go to Cleveland and update documents that are mine to update. We will set some rules that do not require your approval. If you want to talk after that, you will do it without raising your voice or changing the subject. And you will stop telling people that you are carrying me. It is a lie, and we are done with lies. Are you cutting us off? She said. I am cutting off confusion, I said. If you choose to confuse yourselves, I cannot help that. But you will not do it with my name. I closed the folder and let my hand rest on it. When I spoke again, the words came clear and even. From this day forward, I am not your burden. I am the owner of my own life. Melissa stood first. Ethan followed slower. At the threshold, he paused. I opened the door, and the cool air touched all three of us. They stepped onto the porch. I watched the car reverse its headlights, sweeping across the trees. I set the folder back in the drawer pressed until the wood met wood with a small click and stood alone in the room. Word travels in neighborhoods the way rain travels down a roofline, steady and precise, finding every seam. A cousin left me a voicemail that started with small talk and ended with a pause long enough to hold a confession. I drove into Columbus that Saturday to pick up a part for the cottage water heater, a simple pressure relief valve that would keep the system honest. On my way back, I took the long route past Maplewood. A couple from 2 doors down stood by their mailbox and pretended not to notice me passing. At a family birthday later that day, the kind where paper plates bend under the weight of sheet cake, my cousin Mark told me Ethan had kept to the edges. When an aunt asked how home ownership was going, Melissa said fine and looked at her shoes. Nobody pressed. On Sunday, I stopped at the hardware store in Laurelville for screws and a new caulk gun. I said it was. I paid and walked out into a bright strip of afternoon, the air holding that September mix of warm and crisp, and I felt the ground settle a little more under my boots. I did not chase the gossip. I did not feed it. I painted the porch railing where last winter had scuffed it. I replaced the valve and flushed the water heater until it ran clean. By midweek, Abby texted that she was driving down after her afternoon class. I put on a pot of chili because she eats like every 19-year-old I have ever known, with honest hunger that makes an old man glad to cook. The woods were talking high in the leaves when I heard her car on the gravel. She came in without knocking, calling Grandpa the way a person calls home. She saw the pot on the stove and smiled with her whole face. "You made the good kind," she said, and before I could answer, she was at the cabinet for bowls. Halfway through her second bowl, she set her spoon down and looked at me as if she were lining up a shot she wanted to make clean. "People are talking," she said. "At school, too. My phone started lighting up 2 days ago. Some of it is ugly. Some of it is just people being people. I wanted to tell you first. I told them the truth." "Which truth?" I asked. "That you built that house," she said. "That you protected it the way you protect things you love. That you are not someone they keep in a back room like a coat rack. That you are my grandfather, and I am proud to say it." The room felt warmer without the stove being on. I took a slow breath and let it out. She reached across the table and set her hand on mine. She said, "I know he is mad. I know Mom is too. But the people who matter will see it for what it is. The ones who do not were never on our side to begin with." I told her I had no interest in winning a crowd. I told her I wanted the truth to stand where lies had been keeping a seat warm. She nodded and stole a bite from my bowl with a smile that did not ask permission. Then she grew serious again. I was at Aunt Claire's on Tuesday, she said. There was a small dinner and Dad showed up late. He tried to talk about work and nobody bit. Uncle Dan asked him if he had squared things with you. Dad said it was complicated. Aunt Claire set down her fork and said, "No, it is not." And the room went quiet enough to hear the clock. I pictured the scene as she spoke, the shuffle of chairs, the clatter of forks into the sink, the way people sometimes try to change a subject with motion. Abby went on. On the way out, Mrs. Fallon from across the street stopped me and asked how you were. I told her you were good. She shook her head and said she never believed the story that they were keeping you. Then she patted my hand and told me to drive safe. People remember. The current had reversed, not in a surge, but in a steady turn. We took 2 mugs of tea to the porch. The trees were busy with birds, making last checks of the day. Abby sat on the top step and rested her chin on her knees, the mug cupped lightly in both hands. I have a midterm next week, she said, so I cannot stay long. But I wanted to see you. I wanted you to see me seeing you. There is a difference. I sat beside her. For a while we listened to the world instead of our thoughts. Then she spoke again, almost to herself. They always made it sound like strength was the person who talks the loudest, she said. You do not talk loud. You just do the thing. It is louder. The light moved across her face in a slow sweep. I did not say any of that. I just reached over and took her free hand. She let me. Her palm was warm and alive and certain. The simple contact steadied the air around us. For a long breath, neither of us spoke. I felt the old ache in my chest change shape into something lighter. She squeezed once and I answered back without words. When she stood to go, the sun had dropped behind the trees, leaving a thin seam of light along the horizon. She hugged me hard and quick, and then stepped back to look me in the eye. I am proud of you, Grandpa. I nodded and said the only thing that fit the size of the moment. Thank you. She walked to her car with that loose stride of a person who has already decided who she is. The taillights curved out of the drive and were gone. I sat on the step and let the last of the day find its places. The phone in my pocket buzzed. A message from Mark said the family was finally comparing notes, and the tune had changed. An email from Evelyn confirmed our appointment and asked me to bring the latest statements. A wind moved through the maple, carrying the clean smell of dry leaves across the yard. I went inside and washed the 2 mugs, set them beside the sink, and turned off the kitchen light. I lay down with the window-cracked night air finding its way across the floor, and I let the quiet return. The next morning, I drove north, while the mist still lay in the low fields, a quiet ribbon running beside the highway. Evelyn's office door clicked shut behind me, and the room took on that held breath feeling I always get before important work. We reviewed everything without hurry. The schedules, the deed, the trustee powers. Then she slid forward the pages for beneficiary designations and said we would update them now. I wrote Abigail Rowan in my steady hand, added her date of birth, and confirmed the number she answers. Evelyn read each entry aloud, then pressed the pages flat and nodded once. I stopped at the bank on Euclid and met the clerk who had promised me a slot at the lockbox. We walked through the short corridor. Inside, I laid 1 complete set of documents in the box. Trust instruments, recorded deeds, beneficiary forms bearing Abby's name. We signed the log and shook hands. Back at the cottage, I set the second set of copies in the desk drawer and called Abby between her classes. I told her that the paperwork reflected what my heart already knew. We settled on black-eyed Susans and a row of hostas for shade. She said she could come Saturday with gloves and time. I told her I would have the soil ready. The week became a list of solid things. I carried compost from the back, turned it in, and watched the earth darken to the good color. I tightened the porch rail where winter had loosened the lag screws. 2 letters went out midweek, one to the county recorder, requesting certified copies, and one to the insurance agent, confirming the trust as the named insured. I wrote cleanly attached what was needed and walked them to the post office myself. News from Columbus arrived in small, unsurprising pieces. Ethan kept his head down at the office. That was their path to walk. I did not shadow it. I answered only the messages that required answers and let silence do the rest of the work. When a cousin called to ask if I planned to sell Maplewood, I told him the house would remain exactly where it was until I decided differently, and that the decision would be mine alone. He exhaled into the phone and said that sounded right. Saturday arrived with that generous early autumn light that makes everything look newly washed. Abby pulled into the drive with a trunk full of plants and a bag of mulch that smelled like the inside of a good lumber yard. We worked side by side without much talk, the way family sometimes works when time has given it a rhythm. I showed her how to tease the roots free before setting a plant, how to water from the base so the leaves keep their shine, how to press the soil just enough to let air stay where it needs to. She told me about a class that made her think hard, and a professor who asked real questions. We paused to drink water and look at the line of color building under the porch. We ate lunch on the steps. She asked if I had heard from her father. I told her he had sent a short message saying we would need to talk about logistics. I told her I had replied that logistics are simple when facts are clear. I said the door will stay open to any conversation that keeps its voice low and its hands visible. She said that sounded fair. By late afternoon, the beds were mulched and the tools were washed and leaning to dry. An hour later, she sent another message that said Grandma would have liked the hostas, and I read it twice. Sunday morning, I brewed coffee on the stove and walked it outside, steam trailing in the cool. I sat and listened to the first church bell from the little chapel down on the county road and let the sound roll up the hill. On the table beside me lay a copy of the trust, a folded letter from Evelyn, confirming that all filings had posted, and the note card where I had first written Abby's name. I thought of the sentence that had lived in my chest for months without a place to land. It came out clear now. My dignity was never lost. I only needed to remind myself and the world that I do not depend on anyone. The words did not feel like a speech. They felt like a level line across a board that had warped under years of weather and was ready to be straight again. In the afternoon, I took the truck into Laurelville to pick up seed for a strip of lawn that had thinned under the maples. On the way back, I stopped at a roadside stand and bought late tomatoes and a pie someone's grandmother had made in a tin that looked older than me. Back at the cottage, I sliced a tomato so ripe it almost fell apart on the knife and ate it over the sink with salt and pepper. The taste was all sun. I sat again on the steps with a second cup of coffee. I thought about the road behind and the road ahead, about the rooms we build and the rooms we leave, about the hands that help and the hands that hold. I felt full and quiet in the way a man does when work and love have found their proper places. If you have ever been pushed aside or spoken to like you were small, hear me now. Freedom is not a favor, and justice is not a rumor. They are choices made one steady step at a time. If this story found you at the right moment, if it steadied something inside you, I would be grateful if you share, and subscribe. And if anyone tells you it is too late to stand up and put your name back on your own life, remember this simple truth: it is never too late.